Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiator. So one of the problems we have in martial arts is that we want to hit something fairly hard, okay? But usually another person, but in this case a punch bag. And one of the issues is that if you just want to hit something hard, then you wind the body up and then unwind on the target, like this. Okay, really hard. And if you're chopping down a tree or just trying to cut water bottles or just trying to hit an object, like hit a punch bag, then that's absolutely fine. But the problem is when you're trying to hit someone else and they're trying to hit you, what you don't want to do is commit the body and move into distance without having your weapon in front of you, okay? Because if that's my opponent there, and if I move towards them like this, okay, without having my weapon out in front of me, yes, I've generated lots of potential energy there, and I can now unwind on the target really hard. But the problem is, assuming we're not wearing armor, there's no shields involved, this kind of stuff, the problem is I've moved in towards them and they can just hit me before my weapon is a threat, is in front of me, okay? So the way you see people solo training, or the way that you see people cutting tatami mats or water bottles or whatever, is often not very martial, in the sense that their distance and the order in which they move isn't how you would want to do it if you were actually fighting someone or fencing someone. I'll just grab a sword for a minute. So one of the issues is that when we advance, we want the threat to come at the same time, so that as we move towards the opponent, it could be with a lunge, or it could be with passing step. Doesn't really matter, okay? It doesn't matter how you advance on the opponent in this discussion. But when you advance on them, you're moving into a distance whereby they can simply hit you or stab you, okay? So in order to prevent them from just doing that as you move into hitting distance, what you really want to do is present a threat at the same time. So for this reason, it's usually taught, most schools I know, most systems I know, will teach you to launch the attack at the same time as making the step, with a slight caveat. Remember that depending where the weapon, doesn't need to be a sword, but where the weapon starts, it might be traversing a larger distance than your feet are having to cover, okay? If we look at a lunge step, for example, my lunge step might simply be that, okay? In that time, I could move the sword quite a large distance, because the sword is the end of a lever, so the tip might cover a lot of distance, but because it's the end of the lever and being accelerated, and because my hand is faster than my foot, generally speaking, they could arrive at the same time. So I can actually start to move the hand first and land the two things at the same time. And generally speaking, most systems and most teachers that I know will have those two things in accordance. Okay, so generally speaking, the foot will land, and again, it doesn't matter whether it's a lunge step or a passing step, the foot will land at about the same time, more or less the same time as the hit strikes. There are some treatises which explicitly state you don't want the foot to land before the blow, okay? And that is primarily, you do generate more power like that, has to be said, or you can do, depending how you do it. But the disadvantage is you're essentially moving to the opponent's hitting distance with your weapon lagging behind, which isn't ideal, okay? But equally, we could go too far in the other direction. So if we just look at, we look at the initial, I'll switch to the mace again. So we'll look at the initial type of hit, where I do put the body in and then wind through with the hit, okay? So I can't reach here, as you can see, but as I put the body in, if I put the body in and the foot first, okay, so that goes first, bam, and I whip through with the weapon, and it hits very hard, okay? Because essentially I'm winding the body in, and then whipping the weapon through. If I was playing baseball or golf, hitting an inanimate object, then that's fine, but I'm not, okay? I'm preparing to hit someone who's trying to hit me. If I go too far in the other direction, then what happens, okay? I swing the weapon and step through. Okay, and the problem, that's Oscar Cat giving his tuppence worth. The problem there is the weapon isn't in range to hit yet, and I haven't travelled forward. Okay, so not only am I losing some power in the blow, but the blow can't connect because I haven't travelled close enough to the target to hit it. Okay, so in this case, weapon goes and I step through. That's no good at all. Even if I narrow those times down and I do the swing really soon and step quite late, okay, it's a much weaker blow and I struggle to reach the target because I'm only halfway through a step when the weapon is at the right target. So ideally what we want to do is we want the two things to land at about the same time, the hit and the step, because that means at the very moment of my foot arriving at the correct distance, the blow terminates, the blow lands on the target. Okay, so hit. Now, admittedly, that is not as powerful a blow. You can train to make that more powerful, more effective, but it is not as powerful a blow as stepping through and then whipping through with the arm. Okay, and that's why in sports like baseball or golf or cricket, the body will go in before the object whips through. Okay, but in what we're doing, it's very, very different because someone's trying to hit you. Now, let's talk about swords for a moment. Okay, so the mace I'm using as an object because it's a purely striking object. It's a purely bludgeoning thing. With a blade, it's a little bit different because remember that a blade is not a very effective striking weapon. Okay, purely in energy, this strikes with far more energy at the end than this does because this is lighter and the balance points are completely reversed on these objects. While the mace is balanced near the hitting end, very close to the hitting end actually, the sword is like the complete opposite of that. Okay, the sword balances near the hilt. So if I were to hit someone with the pommel, then that would indeed strike with quite a lot of energy, although it's not a very easy way to hold a sword. But with the sword, we've essentially done away with striking power for the most part, depending on the type of sword. Obviously things like falchions and stuff kind of come back in the direction more of percussive weapons. But for the most part, most types of swords have given away striking power for speed, nimbleness, and the fact that you've got an edge all the way up, in this case both sides, in some swords case one side, and a point. That means that I can very, very quickly redirect my weapon very, very easily. I can't do that with a mace so easily. Okay, as you can see, I popped the top off my punching bag with my mace there, but that doesn't matter. So with a sword, because it's a cutting weapon, it can cut, it can draw cut, and it can push cut. So that does mean, theoretically, that I could give up striking power with the sword in order to deliver a push cut. And this is very often what's done in modern Olympic style fencing. Okay, so what I can do is I can, as I attack, I can straighten the arm out and lunge behind it. Now, clearly if that were a thrust, no problem. You straighten the arm and then push behind with the rest of the lunge, with the thrust. And that's fine, that's what you normally do. So in normal fencing, the arm extends first, so the tip redirects at the target, the arm extends, and then the lunge takes place. And that's the normal order of movement for modern fencing, and for 19th century and 18th century fencing as well. Certainly for a thrust. But when we come to hit, it's a little bit different. And so what we normally do, there's a couple of different ways to cut, but either we cut with a moulinet, okay, so a circular motion like this, or indeed you can cut with what I would call a snap cut, a direct cut, okay. And there's something in between those two, okay, so depending on what guard position you're in, so say I'm in high second, from here I can move the blade in a large circle to hit, or I can move it in a small circle. Or indeed, I could just redirect the edge and push with the edge. So I could just do a push cut, a slice. In addition to that, we've got different points of rotation. Okay, there's cutting from the wrist, there's cutting from the elbow, and theoretically there's cutting from the shoulder as well. Okay, so you've got 3 main joints, and in addition to that, you've really got a 4th joint in the hand as well. You can just cut pretty much from the hand and the wrist. The two should work together, but you can just cut isolated, even if you hold it in a hammer grip, from the wrist as well. And you can get a reasonable amount of power just from that, okay? Just from the wrist, enough to sever halfway through a wrist, cutting someone's neck, just from the wrist from here. So this would be outside ward in backsword, for example. So just from outside ward in backsword, with a twist of the hip, putting the shoulder in, and a little bit of weight, and a step, okay, bam, you can get enough force to cut very, very effectively just with that. Clearly, if I put the elbow in as well, then if I put the elbow in, you can get a very powerful cut with that. But you're creating a bigger arc and a bigger opening for the opponent to hit you in. So, I guess the point I want to conclude on is the fact that cutting weapons and striking weapons, in this kind of order of how we move the body, they come out very differently, because with an edged weapon, I can, in an extreme situation, simply extend the weapon and slice with a push. Okay, I've scalped my my punch bag. So clearly, you can just do a push cut, whereas if you're using a mace, you're not going to do much like that. Okay, just extending and pushing is not going to do anything. It gives someone a nasty bruise, but it's not what the mace is for. So the mace has to use this mechanic of moving at the same time as the step. Theoretically, yes, you could hit someone really hard by putting the body in first and then whipping through with the weapon. But again, if you're not wearing armor, using shields, this kind of thing, you're going to get hit on the way in. Okay, yes, indeed, you might hit them with the afterblow if you don't die, but you're going to end up with a weapon stuck through you or in your head. Right, I hope that's a few things to think about. This is trying to combine 2 different topics, okay? Trying to combine the order of movement, which I hope I've kind of hinted at there. It's not a full explanation of it, but also the fact that striking with swords and maces is very, very different because of the different natures and balances of the weapons and how they take effect on the target. Thanks for watching. See you guys soon. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. We have extra videos on Patreon and you can follow us on Facebook.